What's up, everybody? Today I want to talk about Starfield and my thoughts on its procedural generation system and how I anticipate it's going to most likely play out in the final product. As we all know, Starfield is the new IP from Bethesda that is releasing in just a few months in September of this year. They recently held an almost hour-long Starfield Direct, in which they gave us a deep dive into the many gameplay systems that will be at work in Starfield. One of those systems is its procedural generation. The scope of Starfield is extremely vast, as the game intends to have around 1,000 explorable planets for the player to discover. While the game will have a small chunk of specifically handcrafted planets, cities, and quests to embark on, the rest of its universe and its activities will be populated by procedural generation, which has naturally raised a lot of concern from the community. After getting a better idea of how this procedural generation will work, I'd like to share my initial expectations for what we will likely experience as players. Let's begin by talking about how Bethesda is going to create its 1,000 planets. They'll begin with the terrain of each planet by procedurally generating an enormous tile map for each one, with each section comprised of different variations of environmental elements such as hills, rocks, and trees. These elements will likely be categorized by different thematic atmospheres, such as desert, ice, and tropical. Once the tile map is generated, it is then essentially wrapped around the surface of a giant sphere to create a planet. I'm not sure how the atmosphere of each planet will be generated, but it will certainly be included somewhere within the same algorithm. Once the planet's environment and atmosphere are generated, it may or may not then be populated with alien wildlife, vegetation, and an abundance of a particular natural resource. Something new that we learned in the Starfield Direct is what comes next. After the generation of all those elements, the game will then randomly populate each planet with so-called handcrafted locations, points of interest, and experiences for the player to discover. Essentially, the game will have a large bank or database of these handcrafted set pieces to pull from, and randomly distribute them across its universe. As a result, we learn that two players visiting the same planet will likely have different things to see and do, and come back with different stories to tell. This is honestly where I'm personally a little concerned about the side content of the game, that being the hundreds of planets and activities outside of the main questline. While this sounds amazing on the surface, I can't help but anticipate that the depth of these environments and the experiences to be found on them are going to end up feeling shallow rather quickly. I think the word handcrafted to describe these elements can be misinterpreted and is a little misleading. In order for these handcrafted components to work in a procedurally generated system, it's safe to assume that they have to be modular and formulaic in their nature. Because they can theoretically be added to any planet in Starfield's universe, they inevitably have to be interchangeable despite the range of the variety the planets might actually have. Early in the Starfield Direct, we saw the player discover a few locations, such as an abandoned mine camp, a cave, and an abandoned science location. These appear to be a few examples of these so-called handcrafted set pieces that will be randomly placed in our planets. If that's the case, then that same abandoned mine camp, for example, must be playable on a different planet with a completely different atmosphere in a different corner of the universe. This means that while we may discover these locations in different environments, they will all likely function the same way regardless, because they have to maintain a modular nature so they can work reliably in the procedurally generated equation. In other words, I think most of these so-called handcrafted experiences that are randomly added to each planet will likely boil down to the typical bandit camp style locations we've already seen so many times in the open world formula. In fact, I think that this is increasingly likely considering the overwhelming bounds of space Bethesda needs to stretch content across. Will these handcrafted elements actually feel different on each planet? Or will they be the same thing repeated over and over again, only with a different coat of paint each time? Will there actually be interesting side quests to find out there? Or will they all be the same run-of-the-mill, help me kill some bandits over there that are messing with my stuff? Or, I need 10 space flowers for something, can you go get them for me? In a game that is going to orbit so much around the idea of discovery and exploration, it's essential that Starfield keeps each planet and its experiences feeling fresh in order to motivate the player to keep pushing the boundaries of his curiosity. However, because so much of the content outside of the main story is going to rely so heavily on procedural generation, I worry that the cogs of the machine will quickly begin to reveal themselves and make the player go from saying, "I wonder what's over there," to "Why bother anymore? It's probably the same thing I've already seen 20 times." In the end, I believe that the majority of the content outside of the main story and outside of the side quests found in the main cities is going to be extremely resource driven. Most of the planets will likely be extremely empty, as seen in most of the shots in the trailers, but rich in different resources. This is likely where most of the outpost building and research development gameplay will take place, as opposed to completing meaningful side quests and discovering unique locations and events. I anticipate that players who aren't interested in building outposts, researching, and crafting won't find much meaningful to do across the majority of the 1,000 planets. That being said, I am extremely confident that Bethesda has put together an amazing game, and its main content will carry the show beautifully. I just think it's important for the community to temper its expectations for the content outside of the main environments and quest lines. Most of the planets are probably going to be repetitive, with bite-sized events and interactions that can be experienced the same way, interchangeably across all of them. Or perhaps Bethesda has actually created something truly innovative, and I'm completely wrong about all of this. The most important thing to me is that the sense of wonder, discovery, and meaningful interaction is maintained for a long time. That's it for this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and please consider subscribing for more. Thank you.